Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guests. I got to tell you something, people. The best thing on TV, I watch a lot of TV. Sunday nights is the best TV, and I got to tell you because it's got The Vice Principals on HBO, Ballers. I enjoy Ray Donovan. Roadies, I'm not really sure about Roadies. Some episodes hit, some miss for me. But they had an episode a few weeks ago where Ron White, who plays the gruzzled veteran roadie, tells a story about Leonard Skinner and how he met Leonard Skinner. And that episode was actually written by Cameron Crowe, who produces it. And it was just an amazing episode. So if you have Showtime or on demand, find an episode. It's about Leonard Skinner, and it's great. But the show that's really I'm digging is the show. If you haven't watched it, it ends this week, but you can go back on demand. That's the beautiful thing about on demand. Is a show called The Night Of, and you got to check it out. It's very gritty. John Turturro stars in it. It was originally James Gandolfini. He took it to HBO, and then he passed away, and then they brought it back to life. This thing. So go check that out, people, because there is some good TV out there, and you got to see it. And I'll tell you, we have a guy who's been on TV. He's directed TV. I mean, he's a man who wears many, many hats. And I've been watching him, and I loved watching his comedy when I was younger. And he still watches comedy, and it's Will Schreiner. How you doing, Will?
I'm good, Steve. How's it going?
Good. I'm glad. It's funny because I remember I used to watch you when I'm 10. I think I'm like 8 or 9 years younger than you. I used to watch you. I used to watch the Letterman show in the morning. I remember I think I had mono or I was out from school. But that's one of your first big breaks.
Yeah, I mean, David and I were friends at the Comedy Store back in like the late '70s, and when he got a show going, he said, "If I ever get something going, I want to hire you." Oh shit! I think that was Jay Leno calling me. Damn it!
Do you want to take it? Do you want to take it?
Oh, now my phones are all going off. Yeah, Jay, I was talking to Jay the other day. I think he's calling me back. I can always tell it's him because this is no caller ID. But yeah, David Letterman, Jay Leno, Richard Lewis, all the guys that were hanging around the store were all, we were all just struggling comedians. And Dave started doing the Tonight Show as a host, and I did my first 3 Tonight Shows with Dave. And then when he got the show in New York, he took me and Rich Hall and Merrill Marco, and we all went to New York. And, we were like kids in the candy. We were kids with a network show, live 90 minutes every day.
Now, how did you get into comedy? I know you were a child actor. I think your first commercial was like when you were 1 or something like that, and then your father was a humorist who I believe had some shows. Were you just born into it? Did you know you wanted to do it, or was it around the house that you just gravitated towards it?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. I mean, my dad was a humorist and a TV personality. He started in radio. He started as a musician, and he had a show called Two for the Money. Then he had his own variety show. And my dad, since we were twins, I have a twin brother, he started using us in commercials and stuff. So, we just kind of, grew up around show business. My mother was an acrobatic dancer, so, it just seemed like the thing to do. I mean, everybody, if your dad was a fireman, you probably become a fireman or a cop or whatever. So, I grew up around comedy, and I looked at my dad, worked like an hour, one couple nights a week, and I thought, well, I like these hours.
So now you sit there. You're in New York. That's where you grew up, right?
No, I was just born in New York. Okay. I was born in Manhattan, but I grew up in Florida and a little bit in L.A. and mostly in Florida.
So now, when did you decide to start doing comedy, and when did you start getting on stage? I believe you went to film school.
Well, I think you start doing comedy in the schoolroom. I went to Catholic school, so if I could see my friends get smacked by a nun over something I said, I found great joy in that, and I took it to the stage in like '77. I was making funny movies. I went to UCLA Film School, and I was making little short films that I would show at the New Art and the different art house theaters, and they had tracks live. I recorded the track on it. And then I thought, well, I could do these. They were like funny newsreels. So I started doing them at the Comedy Store, and I would put a 16 millimeter projector in the back, and I would show these little. They were really like old time newsreels, but with a hip modern commentary. And I remember a lot of the jokes were sort of diametrically opposed to what you were seeing on camera. So it seemed to be unique and different enough that I became a regular at both the store and the Improv pretty quickly. So then it was just a time of, building stage time and, developing an act outside of the movies and talking about my life. And, as you go through all the stuff we go through, getting married, having kids, getting remarried and all that stuff, it just becomes fodder for material.
Now, what was the scene like? You said all those guys were out there then. I mean, was it like a magical scene because there was all these young comics and there probably wasn't as many. I mean, now in LA, you can drop a hat on a sidewalk and you'll see 27 comics. What was the?
My son's a comic. He's a third generation comedian, and he goes to I go to the open mics with him on occasion and stuff. He's been getting up at the Improv and a little bit at the Comedy Store, and he goes to a lot of these open mics and bringers, and he goes to Flappers, and Richie puts him on at Flappers, and he's developing an act. He's got 20 minutes now, and I would not want to be trying to make it today. When I was doing it, there was a real supportive kind of nature to comedy, and we wrote a HBO show about this. It was a play about the club owner. It was kind of loosely based on Bud Friedman and a little bit of Mitzi, but it was about how comics were supportive. Bud would shut down they'd crank up the TV when you were on the Tonight Show, and everybody would come into the bar and watch, and then they'd cheer if you got over to sit with Johnny, and Bud would buy a round of drinks, and we all went out at night. We went to Cantor's on Fairfax, and we would all help each other with their bits. It was a very collaborative and supportive, but there were only about 200 or 300 comedians in those days, so you knew everybody, and you knew everybody's routines, and guys like Tom Dreesen, who were sort of the a little more successful. They were ahead of me, Jimmy Walker, Shandling, some of these guys that were already had good acts. Those guys were, very giving, and today it's a little darker environment. Everybody's, pissed off about everybody else's success, and there's room for everybody. There's so much TV now. There's so much, there's so many outlets for, for expression and creativity that the internet has opened it up. You can have what you're doing. You got your own show. You don't have to wait around for somebody to give you a show now. People just give you, you just create your own future. And YouTube and a lot of these channels are giving people opportunities to go to the next level. It's also bringing a lot of crap on. There's a lot of wasted time on YouTube, and I still think you have to be entertaining. You have to have interesting characters. You have to have a story to tell. Otherwise, you're just you're not really servicing an audience.
Well, I think it's changed too with the comedy, because I did comedy in the Philadelphia area from 88 to 95. And there was 2 clubs, the Comedy Works and the Comedy Factory Outlet. And, when you were new, you could run back and forth, but then you had to sort of pick your clubs to play on. But it was the same thing.
I used to work the Comedy Works, because that was right on that main drag across from the cheesesteak place, right?
Yeah, and it was the Indian restaurant. It was
I remember going in there a few times. I had a show on in a syndicated talk show that was a Westinghouse deal, so I used to come to KYW in Philly and fill in for Richard Bay, who was the host, and we were basically developing my talk show persona, a lot of it in Philly, so we were there a lot.
Yeah, that was the club, but we would go to Nick's Roast Beef, where we would just hang out, and the same thing, you'd get 8 of you, and you'd go somewhere and you just talk comedy, and you're right, it was very supportive, and that's changed somewhat, which sort of sucks, because that was a cool thing, because the stories you'd hear, or if their comics were in town that were headliners we wanted to see, they usually come out with you too to hang out, because they didn't want
nothing else to do. We only work an hour,
right? So now you're breaking it. You're doing the films and you're doing the comedy, and Letterman. You start doing films on Letterman's show when he had his.
Yeah, I got on. I was a writer for the show, and mostly a lot of us wrote our own bits, and we'd have to bring them on. Rich Hall, Bob Sarlott, who was a San Francisco comic, Edie McClure, and Val Bromfield. And so we would collectively write for the show, but most of us would write our own. I'd go out. I was this was early on in '80. I was going out in the field with cameras, doing a lot of on the street stuff. The kind of stuff that you see now, what's his name, Billy on the Street, and that stuff. We were doing that in the 80s with a portable 2-inch machine. And then once U-matic 3/4 tape came along, we could go out and we'd be a lot more mobile. But and Dave used to go out with Merrill. They'd go out and shoot remotes and everything else. It was great fun, because it was what's called found comedy. You basically, you put Dave as a drive-in window and you got found comedy. So a lot of the early stuff we did. And I took that to other shows. I did a show called The Home Show with Gary Collins for about 6 years. And I went around the world doing pieces. They'd drop me somewhere and I'd hire a crew and we'd make a story about, we'd know what we were doing. We went there with a purpose, but we'd get a crew and when you knew you had shot 5 beta tapes, 5 20-minute tapes, you figure you had enough for a 5-minute story, you could get on a plane and come home.
Right. So now, as you're doing the stand-up, when you said you were on the Tonight Show and Dave hosted, was that your first 3 appearances were with Dave as the guest host?
Yeah, my very first two, I came out on the Tonight Show and just showed a film in the desk spot in what's called the second spot, the panel spot. So I showed a behind the scenes of the Tonight Show film that I'd written that I said wrote, is that not proper English? That I wrote and directed, and then I came back with a thing about the Democratic Convention, and then the third time I did a stand-up monologue and went over and sat with Dave, and then, it took a little of the tension and the heightened, sort of pressure. So when I finally got to do it with Johnny the first time, I'd kind of been there and I knew the environment, because the Tonight Show comedy spot, it was like 500 people in a raked studio. The laughs just bathed you. They drenched you with laughter, and there was real hot. They had a couple follow spots high in the audience, so you really couldn't see anything but the tally light of the camera. And you weren't supposed to look over at Johnny, and you're supposed to just look forward and do your spot. And so, it was a very intimidating. I tell people all the time, standing behind that big heavy curtain, you'd hear the bomb, Doc Severinsen, and the band would, with a thump, would stop, and you'd hear this muttering, my next guest is making a comedian appearance here, and you'd like, oh shit, and your heart would start beating, and then you walk out when you get your first laugh, and you see this with every comedian, even in the archival stuff that's out there. Everybody gets that first big laugh. And you can just see the comics settling in, going, oh, this is going to be good. This is going to be a good ride. And a lot of us used to go and do spots like at 1 o'clock the night before, just to kind of bomb, so we would feel comfortable knowing our set with no laughs.
Oh, God, that's so funny. Now, when you're first with Johnny, how did you do?
Well, I did good. I did real well with Johnny. It was never really scheduled that I was going to get called over. The big carrot for a lot of people was, getting called over their first time out. And it happened to, I think, Ellen DeGeneres and Drew Carey and I think Roseanne. And they had, there were a lot of elements. If the show was running long, you knew you weren't going to get called over. If you went long, personally, like you planned 6 minutes, but with that audience, it would go 7, because you get laughs and applause and stuff like that. So I would always, suggest to people plan 5 minutes, because maybe you'll leave yourself 30 seconds of free time that Johnny will call you over. So I did about 2 or 3 before I got called over, and then then it was pretty much understood you come over every time. And then I got to a point where I was doing a movie for Francis Coppola called Peggy Sue Got Married, and I just came out like as an actor, without doing any stand up, and just sat on the panel and was funny. And that was to me that was like, oh, now I've really made it. I'm like, I'm like Dick Cavett, I'm like, Steve Martin. We just come out and we sit down.
Now, that's true. Now, when you got the initial show with Johnny, did your stand up career change, or had it already changed because you had already done it, even though it was with David?
No, it was like winning American Idol back in those days, in the late 70s, early 80s. When you did the Tonight Show, the next day, you're getting your laundry and the guy saw you, and you're in the market and people go, oh, I saw you at the Tonight Show. And then I got a gig opening for Paul Anka at the Aladdin in Las Vegas, I think after my first Johnny Tonight Show. And I was there for like a week with him, and all of a sudden things start coming in, and then you start getting booked in other casinos. In those days, the aspiration of a comic was to get opening act status in bigger paying venues. So we all would go to either Vegas or Tahoe or Reno or Atlantic City and be an opening act. And then, then once you had some exposure, you start getting billing, and, you kept building up to where, I finally built up to a point where I was what's called a co-headliner. So like Joan Rivers and I would work Caesar's Tahoe, and we would get, equal billing on the marquee, and that was like, oh man, I'm making it. And, even though Joan was making more money, it was still like the prestige of being a co-headliner. Yeah, and the power of television in those days was to take you to those areas. And then along came the 80s, mid 80s, when Roseanne got her TV show, and Drew Carey and Brett Butler and Tim Allen and all these guys were getting their own sitcom. And then that kind of became like the hurdle. Like, I want to get on a Tonight Show with a set that shows my attitude, and then get a development deal.
Now, did you get any development deals for sitcoms? 'Cause I know you hosted your own show eventually, but did you, at that time, did you get a development deal thrown at you?
No, not really. In those days, I wasn't really driven to be on, and it's stupid. Once I started directing sitcoms, I realized what a great life it is. It's probably the best life in show business. You're on a soundstage, with air conditioning and people bringing you food and, light rehearsals, and, and it's a great life. I was attracted to, and it's funny because Barry Sand, who produced the morning Letterman show, once said to me, we were live at 10 o'clock every morning for, about 5 months, 4 months or something. And he said to me, if Dave doesn't show up one morning, I'm going to put you in the chair, so be ready. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that would be cool. I'd like that. And so I kind of just sort of leaning towards, being a host. And I'd really always admired Carson so much, and really sort of everybody wanted that life, to have their own talk show. So it was a weird thing because I made this little film for Letterman about my dog stealing my car and driving around the neighborhood. And Francis Coppola's casting guy saw it, and legendary casting guy that put God, I'm blanking on his name, but he saw me on there and wanted a copy of the film. And so I went into a meeting at Warner Brothers, and he said, are you an actor? And I said, yeah, sure, yeah, I'm an actor, and I've done a couple of small films and things like that. And so I read something for him, and he brought me back to meet Francis. And the next thing I know, I'm got a co-starring role in Peggy Sue Got Married, playing Joan Allen's husband with Jim Carrey and Harry Basil and a bunch of, and Sofia Coppola and Kathleen Turner and Nick Cage and all these people. And we're like, we're on a road to being actors now. This is like 85. And I came back and I got an Amazing Stories episode for Kevin Reynolds. And then I did a Dream On for John Landis, and I'm thinking, man, I'm getting some good credits here. And Alan Thicke was going to host a talk show for Westinghouse, and then he got growing pains and bailed out. And I knew a couple people over there, and they said, well, would you be interested? And I said, yeah, I would be, actually. So I went and I got groomed, and I got sent around the country to different stations to host their local shows, and they developed me as a talk show host. And then we took a show to Nappy, and we sold it in 110 markets, really easily the first year. And it was off and running, and we got like big ratings in the beginning. We got like almost a 4 rating, and of course, those days a 4 wasn't even good enough. They were pissed he didn't have a 5. So I did 200 hours of that, and all the executives at Westinghouse all got fired and were replaced, and so nobody really championed us for a second year. So suddenly I found myself, out of work as a talk show host. So then I started hosting. I hosted a show with animals for CBS and a show about inventions for Goldwyn, and I became what's pretty much like a go-to host, kind of like what Mario Lopez or Billy Bush or these guys are. And I did that for a long time, and that really kind of kills your acting career.
Yeah, because everyone, pretty much thinks of you as a host. Now, what was it like having your own show? I mean, it's the Will Shriner show. I mean, it's your name's on it. Was there a lot of pressure on you? I mean, and what was your day like on that? Because, people say like with Letterman, he would be there all the time. What was your day like when you hosted your own show, and were you involved in the writing process, seeing that you had been a writer and you had been were a comic, and you also made the films? How did you incorporate that all into your experience on the Will Shriner show?
Oh, well, yeah, it was a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of work. You're there, you'd get there at 9 in the morning and you'd get home like at 9 or 10 at night. I mean, it was a long day. And we did 2 shows a day, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So you do a 1 o'clock show and like a 5 o'clock show. So you basically would do a show, and then you'd get maybe a half hour, just to put your feet up, and then you start looking at the notes for the next show, and we'd start rehearsing, whatever demo or whatever what we were doing in the next show. And it was a tremendous workload. It's like a treadmill. You're just running on this treadmill. And in a way, when it finally ended, it was kind of a relief, And I look at like Ellen, and I look at Kimmel and those guys. I mean, they do one show, and it's their whole day, and it's hard. It's hard enough, and we were doing 2 a day, and then towards the end, as the money was getting cut, we were doing 3 a day. So we were doing 3 1-hour shows. I would come home and I couldn't even remember who was on. I'd go, I don't remember. I think it was like Dr. Ruth was on, and that's all I can remember. So it's a great, for the first. When you go to the NAPTY convention, which is where they sell syndicated shows, from that period till you go on the air, you're like a golden child. Westinghouse gave us credit cards, me and the head writer and the producer, and just go out and make friends. And we went around the country, taking press people out to lunch, taking station managers, salespeople, general manager. We were just flying around, making friends and trying to get them to support the show. And the show. We got nominated for 3 Emmys and stuff like that. It was tough. We were up against Oprah and Phil Donahue, and for us, we were on at 9 in the morning in New York up against a local show called Regis and Kathy Lee. And in Chicago, we were on after Letterman, and in LA, we were on at like 10 at night. So it was like, who's our audience? We don't really, who we trying to reach here. It was tough when you syndicate shows. They just try to sell them wherever they can, and it's always been a challenge. Like, what's his name's got a new show, Harry Connick. And it'll be on at all different day parts, and he's probably finding out the hard way. You got to figure out. And they gave us a drawing of a woman who was from Indiana with a high school education, 2.5 kids, $40,000 family income. That's your audience. Go after her. And we go, we really don't want to go after that audience.
Right. Yeah, especially because, your stuff is hip. And it's so funny that, when they do play it on at different times, I mean, you're right. If you're going after Letterman, you know what that is? That's college kids. If you're going to 9 in the morning.
Well, I mean, Letterman's morning show, they replaced it. They put him in the slot of game shows. And, I mean, we lost affiliates. Every week we had pins on the map where we lost a station that just said, no, this is not for us. And they would put on something else. I mean, it was, but David, they recognized in David's, talent and his voice and his take that there's a talent there. So, they found the right day part for him. But, a lot of time, I mean, the networks and the executives in charge, they're just trying to copycat whatever's going on. And they thought, well, Johnny's getting old. Let's find a younger, hipper, guy to, and David was a natural choice. And NBC, when the show ended, NBC was going to let him go. And smartly, his management talked him into getting a holding deal. So David kind of could chill and knew that he was going to come back to another show.
Now, when you're doing the hosting and your own show, were you also still keeping your stand-up chops up? I mean, I know you did, monologues, one thing, but were you still going out hitting the clubs, or you just didn't have the time for that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when after you have a TV show, like after my talk show ended, I did a lot of clubs because you could then fill the clubs. People knew who you were. They paid. There's a big difference between people paying because they want to see you as opposed to just being a comic in a club. So it was easier actually when people are coming in predisposed that they like you and they want to see you. And I did that for 10 or 12 years, and in and around working on this other, I was a correspondent on this ABC show going around the country. But I always kept my hand in stand-up. It was always sort of the ultimate, satisfying job because you're the writer, you're the producer, you're the director, you're the performer, you're the editor. You get to do it all. And to this day, when guys come through here that are friends of mine, I'll jump on, for a bargain price, I'll go open for them in a theater. Bobby Collins or Kevin Nealon, I do that a lot with. Bob Saget was just here. I did it with Bob. I mean, I'm happy to get on in theaters and stuff because that's a better environment for me than like the young Ed Hardy crowd in the comedy clubs.
Now, when you were doing your stand-up as your TV show is done and you're on the home show, did people expect something from you? Because I think a lot of times people watch TV, and if they haven't seen you do stand-up, but they know you're on the show as a correspondent and they like you, they're probably thinking you're going to be just like you are on that show. If your act varies, did you ever have people go, wait a second, this isn't the Will we know?
No, because I'm pretty much true to, my comedy and my voice is pretty much true to who I am. I mean, it's not like, like Bob Saget had a challenge because, he was that dad on Full House. And when you go see him, Bob used to work pretty blue. And, it would shock people because, like, whoa, that wasn't what we were expecting. I think, most comics, the persona, most comics are, there's definitely guys that, are very different, very shy in person. You take a guy like Steve Martin, he's pretty reserved and shy, but, his act was way out there, and his, but I think when you go to see somebody, I think if you're going paying to see him, you're already sort of predisposed that you like them. If you're an opening act for, I open for, country acts, Tom Jones, I open for, Crystal Gale, Loretta Lynn, so, you kind of had to be aware. And I think as a comic, your job is to kind of look at that audience and say, well, let me make them laugh. Let me find a common ground. I mean, you can't just go, here's what I do, and I'm doing it whether they like it or not. I mean, I think it costs you ultimately, in the success of your show. I mean, if I have to work like down here, if I work for an older crowd, there's a lot of condo circuit and theaters, and the crowds can be up 50 and 60 and 70. You got to work a little slower. You got to kind of explain the jokes a little bit. You have to use references that they're going to get. I've always kind of prided myself in if it's a corporate crowd, learning their corporate business and use words that are part of their lexicon. And as a comic, I can go into a club. I went in with Don Herrera the other night, and I can get as dirty as I want to get, but I don't, I don't really feel like I need to do that, And I'm down here on a radio show called the Paul and Young Ron Show every week, and I go on there and I'm just kind of a resident smartass. So for me, that's fun, and it helps keep my my name out there. And people, when I play a theater, I can sell 700-800 seats in the theater. So that's productive. And I still love doing it. My son is coming down next week, and we'll go out and I'll go with him, and we'll do a few shows together.
Now you're doing, you still kept your stand-up going, and you're doing the hosting the shows. When did you turn to TV directing? How did that happen? And you've directed some really good shows. And was it hard to get those jobs, or was it easier? Because I would think they would look at you and they would say, your films have been on, but then they also would know you, as you said, as a host. So now you're coming in directing like a Frasier and stuff like that. How did you decide to venture into that? Did someone ask you to get into directing TV, or is it something that you finally said, this is what I want to do?
No, I was playing poker with Jay Sandrich, who directed, a lot of Cheers and a lot of Newharts and Mary Tyler Moore's, and a director named John Boab, who did a lot of television as well, a lot of Broadway, and Bud Friedman. And we had this poker group: Rich Hall, Tom Dreesen, Eugene Leibowitz was a writer, and there was a bunch of us. And those two directors would always say, "Don't tell anybody, but this is the best job in show business. You get these residuals for the rest of your life." And I just got a residual today from Frasier for a couple grand. It's it's the gift that keeps on giving. And so I had sort of, as I was getting older, and my manager one time said, "Hey, the breakdowns, they're looking for a Will Shriner type." And I said, "Hey, you should submit me. I think it'd be good for it." And they said, "No, they're looking for a younger, cheaper Will Shriner." And that's when it kind of hit me, like, I am aging up, and television and comedy, it's about youth, and that's who they're after, a younger crowd. So I went to see Jay and Jimmy Burrows, who's the other great TV director. We're being honored at a TV Academy event, and I bumped into Kelsey Grammer, who I've known. He grew up in Florida. I've known him, mutual friends for years. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Oh, I just can't play with cards with Jay, and I'm just thinking about TV directing." And he goes, "Well, really? You're serious? Call my office and come to Frasier and watch." So I started coming to Frasier and watching, and I go to the all the rehearsals and all the run-throughs and all the shows, tapings. And from there, I became friends with some of the great directors that were coming through there: Pam Fryman, Jeff Melman, Andy Ackerman. Different directors would take me, with them on other shows, and I kind of really put in a hard year going around. And you're kind of like stinky fish when you come to a show, because everybody wants to know, who's this guy? What's he doing here? Oh, he's another guy looking to get a directing gig, and the ADs don't like you, and the DP doesn't like you, and the editor doesn't like you, because you're a threat to them, because everybody wants to direct a show. So you do your time, you try to stay out of the way, and I really learned a lot watching Burroughs, and Pam Fryman was a great mentor, and then one year, it was like towards the end of the season, and Peter Casey, who ran the Frasier show, said, I assume you're hanging out here because you want to direct one of these. And I said, no, Peter, I just come. I like to see what you're wearing every day. And he laughed, and he said, well, we're going to put you up for one next season. And I got one in January of 2000. And it was a good script. It was a good episode. It won a Writers Guild Humanitas Award, and I did a good job. And then I got another one. You get one Frasier, then you get two, then you get four, then you get six, and I just kept building my resume on shows. And I went with Ted Danson, had a show called Becker, and I went over on Encore with Nathan Lane, had a show, and I went and I observed, and I got opportunities. I got an opportunity to direct Everybody Loves Raymond. And then Norman Steinberg, who was a great writer and wrote a lot of great movies, was running Bob Saget's show. And Bob had a show on the WB called Raising Dad. So I went over there and directed 3. And then they offered me the whole rest of the season when they got picked up. And of course, I took as many as I could, but I was still doing Frasier and Becker. And I knew those shows would see, a long shelf life. So I stayed with the good shows and did as many other shows as I can. I had Wife and Kids. I did a Gilmore Girls. I did Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place. And there were a bunch of shows. You just kind of picked them up as you could, because at those days there were a lot of sitcoms, and everybody couldn't work. There's even more sitcoms, but it's a different kind of style. They're not the multi-camera shows that were of the Friends and the Frasiers and the Raymonds were all shot 4 cameras in front of a live audience. A lot of shows now are done single camera, and usually one of the showrunner, writers, producers, they do a lot of them themselves because it's easier. I was talking to Steve Levitan once. I was trying to get on Modern Family, and he says sometimes it's easier for us to just do them than to have tell somebody else how you want to do it. So you just kind of keep banging your head against these different shows and keep building your resume. Then I met Jimmy Buffett and this opportunity to make this movie called Hoot, which was a Carl Hiaasen book, kids book, and so I read the book and I said, "Just make a great movie." So well, how do we do that? And so I said, "Well, you get a script if somebody wants to buy because nobody's bought the option to book." So I said, "I'll write the script if I can direct it." And so we shook on a fish sandwich in the Keys, and I went back and I wrote the script, and I got notes from Jimmy and I got notes from Carl, and then he gave it to Frank Marshall, who's a big deal producer, Kennedy Marshall, and Frank had really good notes, and so I went back and addressed those notes, and then we took it out, we took it to Walden, and we sold it like in our first meeting.
Now you're coming from.
And so now we're off making this. Now we get to make this movie. So I start casting it, and there was a little girl in Bob Saget's show, the daughter named Brie Larson, and I just always loved her and always saw her as so talented and vulnerable. And so I cast her as one of the leads in the movie, and she's, to my great pride, she just won an Oscar, a BAFTA, a SAG Award, and a Golden Globe for her performance in Room. She's just a wonderful little actress, and now she's in Kong Island. She's got Captain Marvel. I mean, she's got this great career, and you go, oh, that feels good that you spotted somebody that really, that I think that was her first lead in the movie. And we had a kid named Logan Lerman that played the male lead, and he's gone on to do dozens of movies. And Luke, so you were talking about roadies. Luke Wilson was our lead guy, and I actually like roadies. I watched a couple of them. I haven't seen. I guess there's 4 or 5. You were talking at the top of the show. I'm just caught up on Night Of. I think Night Of is just so interesting. It's so dark, and it's so well done. I mean, I can't wait for the finale episode.
It's an hour and 45 minutes. The finale.
That's coming up, I guess, next week. And,
yeah.
And Ray Donovan is like a great show. I mean, we were just talking on the radio the other day about our favorite. I mean, there's so much great television. Bloodline's a show they shoot down here.
Love that.
Another great show. I mean, Homeland. I mean, House of Cards. The great stuff that we're watching on TV now is being done at places where the creative types are being left alone to do what they do, and they give you the money and then you go make the show. I mean, there's not like when we were on Frasier, we didn't have network notes. Nobody came and when you get on these young news shows with young executives, they all want to, come in and give you their opinion, and sometimes you have to trust the people you hire to do the show they want to do, But that's the beauty of film, is you're kind of the boss, and in television, you really work for the showrunners and the writers. You work for the producer, you work for the network, and you work for the studio. So you have like 4 bosses that because you want to come back and do shows for other networks and for other studios. So, TV is a different animal, and I think I enjoy film more because it's more of the directors. And since I was also the writer, I kind of saw it a certain way. So, then the goal is to execute it, in the time frame and with the budget that they give you.
I was going to ask you about, when you said your first TV directing gig was the Frasier gig with a great script. Now, for you must love that, because that's like an all-star baseball player joining an all-star team, or a rookie joining it. I mean,
oh yeah. In a show like Frasier, you just try to stay out of the way. you point the cameras, you set your shots. I don't go in and give a lot of acting notes to David Hyde Pierce and John Mahoney and Kelsey, but you can help with the funny. I mean, there's been many cases. There was a joke that was just dying on Becker and Ted, and I gave Ted, I said, let's do one more pass. And I said, try this line. And it got a huge laugh. And sometimes it gets a huge laugh because it's different, but sometimes it gets a good laugh because it's better. So it got a big laugh, and the showrunner came over to Ted and goes, hey, Ted, great ad lib. And Ted pointed at me, he goes, that was Will. And I looked at the showrunner, who I had a good relationship, Dave Hackle, and I said, hey, a little free funny, what do you, no charge, on the house. But that was a helpful thing for me as a TV director, was to bring, I do think I know where the laugh is, and I can mark a script when I hear it at the table read, where I think the laughs will be, and you're an asset if, when I remember I was doing Norm Macdonald's show, and Bruce Helford, who's done a lot of shows and was a great showrunner. They would just stop and rewrite if something died, and the audience would sit, and the warm up guy would try to keep them busy, and we sometimes would lose the audience just because of the time. And if I had a punchline or something I could throw in there, it saved everybody time. It was a much more efficient way to work. Unfortunately, they don't look at the directors to bring the funny, because the writers, that's their job. But if you do, it's just, I think it's an asset. I know, I know a lot of actors that are and comedians. Bobcat Goldthwait's directing now, and he's certainly a guy who knows where the funny is. And I think it's an asset over an AD or an editor who doesn't really. You got to know how to talk to camera. You talk to cameras. You got to know how to talk to actors. You got to know how to cover. You got to know how to vary your coverage. I mean, there's a lot more to it. Everybody just thinks they see the quad and they go, oh yeah, I got a master and a couple singles, and it's a lot more to it, and it's also pacing and when I talk about directing in film schools and stuff, I mean, I bring like a master of a scene, and then I show how I used all the cameras to isolate those reactions and those where the punchlines were, where there were extra laughs based on reaction. When I was doing Raymond, Phil Rosenthal was very concerned with how you switch the audience feed. So if you're going to cut to Mom Marie for a reaction, the audience better see that cut. They want to see that because a lot of times we do it as a play, and but Phil really, and rightly so, you would go up and sit with the what was called the audience switcher or the technical director and say, yeah, make sure you go in on her for a shot and then come back out or whatever. So that was another and you're like, you've had to chug down a quick meal, you're getting ready to do the show, and now you're sitting with the the TD going, make sure you do this and this. So it was it's a long day, but at the end it was a great experience. I mean, I've directed hundreds of hours of television stuff, but I think the sitcom is like my favorite.
Do you think that you did the sitcom was easier for you to direct because one, you had the comedy background, two, as you said, you were an actor. I mean, you were directed by Coppola, and then you had your talk show and your hosted show and game shows and all that stuff. So you saw all kind of directors and you saw what worked and what didn't. Do you think that helped you transition into these gigs?
Well, it helps anybody transition. My first job when I was 20 years old, I worked on a movie called Ode to Billy Joe. Max Baer, who was Jethro on the Beverly Hillbillies, directed this movie with Robbie Benson, and I was a PA for $100 a week delivering scripts and running around. I said, can I come on location? I'll pay my own airfare. Just give me a hotel and a per diem and like a minimal salary. And I said, but here's the deal. I want to work in a different department each week. So I worked in transpo 1 week, camera 1 week, sound 1 week. Worked in the office. Worked with schlepping the actors with the ADs and being a PA. And I learned like everybody's job. And I think that's advice I would give to anybody. I mean, the more you know about what other people are supposed to do, the better you are all around. So for anybody, I went and did a show for Long Island University. We did a presentation with a bunch of film students that had written this master's program, and it was kind of a dark. CBS gave us $50,000 to make this pilot. It's about a Oxycontin addicted fireman, and so we had all these kids, and everybody wanted to be the director, pointing the camera, but nobody, like, hey, can you set a C-stand over there? Can we flag that light? Like, what? So it was hard because there were like two of us that had ever been on a set before, and but out of this, I mean, I try to teach all these kids. I said, learn all this stuff because it's only going to make you better as a writer. It's going to make you better as a performer. My son worked as a stand-in and still works sometimes as a stand-in and loves it because he's on a set. He sees, how to behave. He's learned, what it takes. You're never late. There's a responsibility because we, as producers and directors, we don't have the luxury of somebody screwing up. It's so expensive, the process, that we need, we need to hire only pros that we know are going to hit their mark, know their lines, and move on. We don't have time to, nurse anybody through. I mean, I've had to let actors go on shows that just didn't deliver what they did at the audition. and it's hard, and you try to bring them along, and the studio's like, get rid of her, and you go, no, let me give her another day, let me work with her a little bit, and then you go, nah, it ain't happening. So that's for anybody who's young and aspiring to be an actor or even a comic, don't come out and phone it in, man. Know your stuff, work at it, come and do a sound check. I used to bitch about the sound, and Gary Mulder, a good buddy of mine, he says, you can't bitch about the sound if you don't come to the sound check. You got to come and make sure that the monitor volume is where you want it, and what the house sounds like, and what the light situation's like. I mean, you have to take an active part in the product.
Now, when you as you said, you directed sitcoms and other shows. What was it like directing a drama after directing a sitcom? Because, as you said, your background is stand-up comedy. When the laugh works, it's going to hit. If the laugh doesn't work, you got to fine-tune something. And it's also 22 minutes compared to 44 minutes. What's the difference when you start to direct a drama? Do you have to direct it a little bit differently, and because you're not working with the live crowd? And what do you do then?
And you're doing it in a single camera, a 2-camera setting. Like when Gilmore Girls was like a dramedy. There was some lighter moments, there was some dramatic moments. A show like that, it's and for a lot of us that were freelance directors that weren't like the show's director every week, you had to kind of come in and take the temperature of the actresses and the set and and who was in charge. And when I went in to do Gilmore Girls, a couple of times the little young girl, I'd say, hey, we're going to try and do this in a oneer, and then she would walk out. I said, you seem mad when you came in. Can you, like maybe a little more fun coming in the door? And she said, whatever, and you're like, okay, just, if you can, try it, and if she didn't do it, I'm going to do 10 more takes till she does it. But, you don't have, the point of the question, the drama, they're not really different. You're still telling the story with a lens and actors. To me, it's important. Eye line becomes important. Getting the best eye line on an actor. A lot of people will upstage themselves. The camera, the fluidity. We live in a time now where the camera is so fluid. But you take a couple of directors like Rob Reiner and Clint Eastwood. They're not big moving the camera around. They set up a master and they do their coverage and they go in. But then you got these fluid shows where the camera. I just saw Born Identity. I don't think the camera ever stopped moving. And with the Steadicam changed a lot, and the fluidity of the smaller 4K cameras have given us a lot more mobility to do stuff, and you can shoot a lot more coverage, but eventually it's all got to fit together, and knowing what editing is all about. For anybody, I used to cut a lot of stuff on a Moviola, so I kind of grew up editing. So when I would shoot something, I always know how it would cut. And somebody gave me a film that they shot and said, can you cut this? And I'm like, well, the guy that shot it didn't really, give us a lot of choices here. Nothing matches. So I don't know. I don't want to get too serious about it all, but I do love. Your show. You're a comic. It's all about making people laugh going out. There's no better joy than having 1,000 people in a room, and you're at the Focus, and there's no drink service, and there's no thing, and they're hanging on every word. That's why we all try to do theater. All try to play in theaters. I think I'd love to do a one-man show on Broadway sometime. That's my goal. Is I'm working towards something like that one day.
Now, with the movie, you said about the movie Hoot, when you had to write that, had you written screenplays before? Everyone always says, oh, yeah, I wrote a screenplay, and a lot of us wrote screenplays, and we just put them in our drawer, and then you look at them like a year later, the first one you write, and you go, oh, my God, what the hell was I thinking?
I'd written a couple screenplays with some friends, and I'd written a lot of other stuff. But, I was working off of a book. So it was easier than just an original screenplay because I had a framework and I knew, what the story was. I had gone, when I first moved to LA in the 70s, I'd gone to this place called Sherwood Oaks Experimental College, and I took a writing course for like 12 weeks with Rod Serling. We had Francois Truffaut came and would show movies. They had Hitchcock. They had everybody. They had acting panels with De Niro, Pacino, Jimmy Caan, all on the same panel. This guy got everybody, and it was a no credit, it was just a no bullshit film school, and it was just like you learn from the best. And like guys, George Carlin taught a 10-week comedy class that I took. Jonathan Winters taught a 6-week comedy class, and Jonathan, as a class, we had to keep Jonathan on track. But I mean, I wish that I would have recorded it or kept better notes, because I mean, they had so much to share and they were into it. And as I bump into a few people that were in that class with Carlin, and we all just go, man, what a wonderful experience. I was friends with Buddy Hackett, and Buddy used to invite a bunch of young up and coming comics over to his house, and he'd make a kosher lunch, and we'd all sit around, and he'd lecture us on comedy, and it'd be like 10 young comics, and then Louis Nye and Tom Poston and Sandy Hackett. We'd all sit in his living room, and it was like it was going to college comedy class. One time, Seinfeld and I were both working in Vegas. I think we were doing the Merv Griffin show at the Riviera, and Cosby was on, and Cosby invited us to come back to the Hilton and hang out before his show. And we went back in his dressing room, and this was a long time ago. And Bill and Jerry and I sat in his dressing room just discussing the art and skill of comedy for like an hour. And then David Copperfield was the opening act, and he says, "You guys want to go up and see Copperfield?" No. We want to sit here as long as you'll sit with us. And I mean, Bill couldn't have been more supportive. I mean, Bill's was a true scholar of comedy, and sadly his career's taken such a horrible turn, by his own device. But I mean, he was really a fan of comedy. He was a great storyteller. It's funny because I met him when I was a kid. And I lived in Beverly Hills, and he lived up the street from a friend of mine. And he invited the neighborhood kids, we were in like 6th grade, up to his house on a Saturday, gave us popcorn and showed us Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton, some of the old Mack Sennett comedies, and just like talked to us about comedy. And we all knew him from his albums. And it was like, wow, and I don't know, all of those influences probably have affected me over the years in terms of why I do what I do.
Now, when you started directing the movie Hoot, because it was, as you said, it's a different, not what you're used to. It's a movie. How do you attack that differently than you attack a TV show? Because now it's also, you've written a script. Yes, you've got notes, but you've written a script, and it's more of a, Will Schreiner project. I mean, now you're writing and directing. Did you find it easier to direct your own writing, or did you find it harder because you wrote it? And you weren't, like with Frasier and stuff like that in these TV shows, you worked on these great shows, which were, the scripts, that were known characters. What was it like for you to just direct from, I know it's from a book, but your own words, translating it, what was that experience like?
Oh, I found it easy because I'd had a lot, it wasn't like, a lot of people get their first time directing, it's like, okay, where do we put the camera? How do we block this? I mean, you attack it in little pieces. I remember we wanted to start off at a beautiful location, which is this old sort of plantation-style house. So the footage that the studio looked at the first couple days, it was good performances, and it was this beautiful Florida location. And it was funny, after a couple of days of looking at it, they were like, okay, we don't need to hang around. We don't need to, these people know what they're doing. You always have to convince people that you know what you're doing, because everybody's afraid for their jobs. So for me, I was pretty comfortable. And when I hired this DP, who was a fellow named Michael Chapman, who had been a lifetime ASC cinematographer, he won a Lifetime Award. He directed movies. He directed All the Right Moves with Tom Cruise, and he directed Clan of the Cave Bear with Daryl Hannah, and he had come up with that whole look, and he won an Oscar for The Fugitive. I mean, Michael was like 70 years old when I hired him, and the studio was like, "Why are you hiring this old guy?" And I'm like, "I'm hiring a guy that's got more experience than this whole building does."
Right.
And he had been an operator on Jaws and on The Godfather, and he'd worked with Gordon Willis for years. I mean, here was my collaborator who I trusted and respected. So, I've got a great guy on the camera. I had a great first AD named Bruce Moriarty, who had done Forrest Gump and Bad Boys and big movies and small movies. So that's your core, your AD, your first AD, and your DP. So we kind of would map out our day every day and bite it off, and we always made our day. We always came in we got our work done for the day, no matter what the weather was. We shot through 4 hurricanes down here and just kept forging away. We always had a backup plan. We had cover when it rained, and it was a very efficient 30. I think we shot 32 or 3 days, and we shot on Panavision 35 millimeter, which is, now nobody does that anymore unless you're Scorsese. Everybody's shooting digital and shooting, but, we wanted to do a beautiful, film. So we all kind of came to it with the same vision and the same, objectives. And I think, when you're hiring a crew or when you're shooting something, whether it's a student film or whatever, you want to get people of like minds and who have the work as the most important element.
Now, you shot that in Florida, and now when did you decide to move back to Florida? When did you decide to leave LA, or have you been most of your career living in both places?
No, I lived in LA for 30 years. I kind of went to high school and college down here, and then went out to go to UCLA, and I was there for 30 years. And when we shot this in 2005, I came back to LA to edit, and it was taking me like 30 minutes to get to the Galleria, and I only lived in Woodland Hills. It was just I was like fed up with the traffic and too many people, and I just kind of was ready for a break. And I mean, Florida, it's a really pretty spot. I'm into boats and sailing and scuba diving and flying, and this is like the ideal place to do all that stuff. And I come back to LA and work. I'll come back and do shows. When I came back and did I think a Gilmore Girls after the movie, and I came back and did a couple other projects, and I went shot a project in New York. But I don't really really want to live back in LA anymore. My daughter was working on Mike and Molly for 3 years at Warner Brothers, and my son is aspiring, and I go see them and hang out with them. But I don't know, as you've been doing it a long time, you go like, what's the quality? What do I want to do? I mean, I'm never going to retire. When I meet all these, I meet these old comics. There's a comic down here named Woody Woodbury. He's 92, and he's always like, I got a show tomorrow night. He's like lives for the shows, and he's still out there working, VFW things, and he's a very funny and good guy. But yeah, I don't think once you're a comic, I don't think you'll ever quit being a comic. A lot of guys, get seduced by other things. Adam Sandler's had a brilliant career with other movies and success, but he still comes back to comedy. I think the only guy that really hasn't come back to stand up is Woody Allen. And what has he done? 70 movies. Steve Martin even came back a little bit, but it's funny. I saw them and Martin Short and Steve Martin together. I mean, and they were both, they still, Marty, he feeds on an audience. He plays more to the audience than anybody. But I think that's the joy. I mean, here's a guy with a lot of theater background.
I saw Martin Short at Alex Theater in Glendale. I know the girl who ran it. She called and said, you guys want to come? And I'm going to tell you something. That show, talking about just energy. I mean, he comes out and he changes the characters and he sings and he dances. And you're right. Yeah. He's amazing.
You look at a guy like that and you go, that guy's a triple threat. I'm not, I look at myself as I can do a bunch of different things. But there are guys who I'm in awe of. I mean, I didn't know Sebastian Maniscalco. We were on a radio show together that I do, and he didn't know me, and I didn't know him. And I went and see him at this big playhouse here, 1,500 people, and I mean, he just killed me. I mean, he's so animated, he's so alive, and I'm sure you've seen his act. I mean, the guy's great, and you go, where did he come from? But that's the joy of comedy is when guys come out of nowhere. When Stephen Wright emerged on the LA comedy scene, everybody's like, whoa, refreshing, smart, clever. I mean, there's always room for people, if you got a unique kind of approach,
Now, with your stand-up, how did you get involved in doing a lot of corporate gigs and stuff like that? And does that excite you because you have to pretty much do somewhat of a different act?
Yeah, I don't know. I all along, I mean, because if you're clean, if you're dirty, corporate's not open to you, because you'll piss somebody off quickly. I started doing corporate work early on because I was kind of a geek in terms of electronics, and I started going to Comdex and CES and all this stuff, and slowly, Canon and different people would hire me to do spokesman things for them, to put films together for them, to create stuff for them. And then I got asked to help with the launch of Microsoft's Windows 2000 event, which was a big, expensive event. And I wrote and produced that show. And we had, Patrick Stewart as our host, and Bill Gates was the sort of the MC and running it. And I just, I would just reel with Bill. I didn't really, and everybody lived in fear of him, and I was just like, I was giving him shit sometimes, which was, hey, we were talking about, a joke about putting stuff in the overhead bin on an airplane, and he goes, he didn't get it, and I go, oh, Bill, well, you're losing touch, this private jet thing, man, you're losing touch with the little people, and he chuckled, and so then he hired me to write and direct his retirement video when he quit being a CEO of Microsoft. And you talk about, what an odd project that is. And we had all these limitations on, can't talk about his money, can't talk about his kids, we can't talk about this, can't talk about that. And so, we kept bouncing ideas around, and we eventually came up with, I got a couple of friends, and we came up with this day in the life scenario for him. And it turned out really funny, and because it was like a pedestrian little day in his life, and he was doing things that he didn't even understand why they were funny. And I kept, trying to explain them to him. And there's a scene in a coffee shop where he has to go over, and he's getting orders a cappuccino, and he goes over to the discount bookshelf and picks up DOS for Dummies for 10 cents and buys it. And he's like, "Why is that funny? Why is that funny?" And when I showed it at Comdex in front of 20,000 people at the MGM Grand, the minute the camera landed on the book, they were laughing. They were ahead of us in the joke, and it just killed. And I went backstage afterwards. I go, "Well, Bill," because I told him if it didn't get a laugh, I would mow his yard. And he says, "Why are you going to mow my yard?" I goes, "Because that's how confident I am that I will get a laugh." So when I went backstage, I go, "I guess you have to mow my yard now." And he kind of chuckled, and I look back on that experience. It was a great, it was a little 5-minute video, but he used it for years and years as he was, in his speaking tour, as he was going around. Technology and those kinds of jobs. I think your question was, how do I get corporate work? So, I go and I moderate. I do a thing for the ATM industry every year, and I moderate I MC the show. And if you just keep as a moderator, as an MC, you just want to keep it moving, keep it light, and be and be good at your job. So I do those a lot, only because they pay the bills, and you don't have to you don't have a lot of advance, or you don't have to draw anybody. You just come in, and Kevin Nealon and I were doing a bunch of stuff in the industry, in the entertainment industry. He would do kind of a Saturday Night Live thing, and I would shoot the film pieces. And those jobs were plentiful. So we used to do them a lot. I'm doing less of them now, only because I don't really want to get on an airplane anymore.
Right. We got to wrap up soon. I got to ask you, when you do stand up now, has your writing style changed through the years? Do you find yourself, a lot of people who've been doing it for a while start being more storytelling instead of telling jokes? Do you think your writing style has changed?
I think when you watch other people work, like I watched Sebastian work, and I thought, God, well, those are such great stories, and he's so physical, and he's so, animated, and, I've always been kind of a line comic, jokes and lines, and not so much, I don't tell jokes, but, funny observations. I think I've always tried to write a joke a day, and write it down, put it somewhere. I've always found that, it's just a muscle that if you don't do it, and you don't find some other, and I write about, I fight with my wife a lot, and I have this joke that I love, that I said we fight about everything, we can't even agree on a safe word, and it dies with old audiences, but I still love it. I think it's a smart joke, but you got to know what a safe word is, I think we do all, we don't settle as the longer we do it, we don't settle for the easier stuff. And I think I have a lot of friends that wrote, jokes for Letterman and Leno and those things. And I think it's always about, like you come up with a setup and a punchline, and then it's all about just taking that, because it's comedy's surprise, so it's just about taking that expectation a little far from where you think it's going to be. And that's what formulates a great joke. You can't, if you take whatever, God, Trump's been, the easiest thing in the world, the topical stuff's great. The problem with topical stuff is it has a short shelf life. So for me, I go on this radio show every Wednesday. It's called the Paul and Young Ron Show down here in Miami. And on the way in, I listen to NPR. I don't even listen, and I just see what's happening in the news and write 5 jokes about it and get in there and, and just come up with something.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for coming on, man. This is great. You have such a great career. And your website is Shriner Media.
Right, Shriner Media. Yeah, that's it.
People check that out. It's a great website. So please go look up Will's work. It's Will with one L, not two. And people,
yeah, that's true.
Do you tweet?
The second one's silent. But Steve, it's a pleasure to talk to you. You know, you're obviously a fan of the art form, and keep ideas. Share what you know, and make people laugh. That's at the end of the day, you look at guys like Jerry and who've gotten Jay and these guys who they're pretty comfortable financially, but they still love it. We get out and it's nothing like it.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on. So it was great talking to you. And so people, check out Will Shriner. Also follow me on Twitter at Cooper Talk. Go to my website, coopertalk.net. I have 545 episodes up there. You can email me, Cooper at coopertalk.net. I'll get back to you. And also Instagram and Words with Friends, it's Cooper Talk 1. iTunes, Cooper Talk, one word. And don't forget my other website, stopthesalt.com. That's my low sodium cooking cookbook, 120 easy recipes. Go buy it there. I make more money than if you buy it at Amazon, and they're easy to make. So anyway, people, follow Will. Go to his website. Follow Cooper Talk. I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guest. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I will talk to you guys next week.